Welcome, fellow navigators of the modern workplace. You've just tuned into Uncharted HR, the podcast that ventures beyond the familiar borders of traditional human resources, mapping out the future of work, one digital border at a time. I'm Dr. Robin Ludwig, your host and guide on this expedition through the ever-evolving landscape of HR technology. This season, we are setting sail into the realm of inclusive E-HRM, where innovation meets intention and recruitment becomes a gateway to equity. In today's episode, we are zeroing in on digital recruitment, the first port of call in any talent journey, but one that can easily drift into impersonal waters if not guided by inclusive design and ethical data practices. Joining me is an incredible industry partner, Bryce O'Hara, who's here to share lived experiences, practical wisdom, and a few cautionary tales from the front lines of digital hiring. We'll be unpacking questions like, can e-recruitment truly reflect the human behind the CV, or are we losing something vital in the automation? What are the biggest hurdles in building systems that don't just scale, but also support equity and belonging? And how do we ensure the data we collect doesn't just serve efficiency, but also ethics? We also explore what features today's systems are missing, how bias sneaks into digital processes, and how success in inclusive recruitment is actually measured. Not just in numbers, but in impact. So, whether you're an HR tech buff, a recruiter rethinking your toolkit, or a leader committed to building fair hiring processes, grab your logbook, because this episode is charting a course through recruitment with empathy, innovation, and inclusion at the helm. Hello, Bryce. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Let's jump right into the deep waters. Does e-recruitment dehumanize the application experience? What do you think?
For me, in terms of dehumanizing the application experience, I think largely it's going to come down to how it's implemented and the intent behind the implementation as well. If you go into that process with implementation to make it more efficient and turn it into what I call a human churning machine, then absolutely it could dehumanize the process. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way either. I think one of the more topical conversations that's happening amongst applicants at the moment, rightfully so, is that the recruitment process or the application experience for applicants is very quickly becoming dehumanized. I mean, we see the integration of AI recently and people being interviewed by, an AI figure that doesn't quite look or feel human. And we wonder why this growing sort of sense that people are being treated as a number rather than a person. And I guess depending on the intent behind the establishment of whatever e-recruitment system that you're looking at, it can certainly dehumanize it. I don't think it has to be that way. And I've got a couple of strategies to overcome that.
I'm excited to hear about the strategies, but first of all, do you want to set the scene? What are your exposure or experience when it comes to E-HRM and recruitment in general?
Yeah, so I've worked within the HR industry for a couple of years now, and I've had the pleasure of being exposed to quite a few different softwares and systems that are out there. And some of them have utilized AI really effectively that bring home the applicant experience, because at the end of the day, for me as a recruiter, it's really important for my hiring managers to understand that we're not only assessing our applicants, but they're also assessing us as a good place to work as well. And often that part gets forgotten about. So if you create a really sort of cold, distant, as we call, dehumanized application process, what some of the evidence is showing is that applicants are making a connection between that recruitment process and how that organization treats its people, which is really quite scary. So people going through a recruitment process and, they don't feel respected or their time is valued or they don't feel like they're being treated as a person or as an individual that can bring value. I've had instances where people don't have a good experience and they get to the end of a process and decline the role because they've made a connection with, well, that's how the organisation treats its people.
Okay.
But I've also been exposed to systems or programs that, in my view, haven't figured it out quite yet, and I've got a bit of a ways to go to make it more engaging and inclusive. So you're often being sort of integrated as what I call a human churning machine, where it's just get people through, not really looking to build connections. Well, so you're not looking to build connections at this part of the process, then there's an assertion that could be made, you're not looking to build connections when the person comes in regardless. So I think as time goes on, there's going to be a lot of questions on what AI can bring to the recruitment process, or any E-HRM system.
To your first point, I like that you highlighted recruitment is around selling and buying. So checking each other's out and understanding what are the values and how do I maybe contribute to the organization, but also how does the organization benefits me in my own career aspirations. You said already there might be some challenges here and there, but can you maybe share an example where inclusive E-HRM significantly improved the recruitment outcome, so the positive side of it?
When there's a really user-friendly and accessible design, I think it's a bold assumption to a degree to assume that everyone's got the same technological capability, but also not necessarily factoring in various forms of disability as well, which is really important. Because if you want to create an inclusive organisation, then if your first introduction to an applicant is your recruitment system, then you want that system to be inclusive as well. So some of the systems that I've been introduced to through various tender processes when we're procuring those systems is text-to-speech options for people that have some sort of hearing impairment, or colour contrasting as well for people that are colourblind, which I thought was really impressive. Adjustable text for people living with vision impairment, but also multilingual sort of language options for translation. One that I saw only just a couple of days ago is for people with, various forms of learning disabilities. They've actually been able to use AI to simplify a position description or simplify an advertisement. Us recruiters, we tend to use a lot of jargon, rightfully or wrongly, and they've been able to really creatively utilize AI to simplify those sort of documents so they're easier to comprehend and easier to understand. Because, in a recruiter's mind, we know exactly what we're looking for and how we're trying to communicate that. Doesn't necessarily mean it's like hit the mark with that particular individual. Other really positive outcomes as well. The recruitment process is someone's first introduction to the organisation, whether we realise it or not. Because, we're obviously shopping for candidates, but candidates are obviously shopping for a place that they want to work. And we spend a large portion of our lives at work as well, whether it be 35, 38 hours. So why not make it enjoyable? And we're seeing a shift in the talent market now where it's like, well, this is actually what people are looking for. Money and maybe flexible work arrangements aren't necessarily front of mind, but they want valuable work and an organisation that actually cares about them and cares about what they can bring. If dialing it back to some of the outcomes, if you've got a recruitment system that, utilizes AI ethically but doesn't lose the human factor and still allows for human interaction, so don't use AI to interview people. It's not a human interaction. There's so much poor feedback going on within the industry at the moment around that. We've recently introduced AI into the interview process, but not to interview candidates, but rather to take notes for us and summarize the outcome of the interview and all that kind of thing to make that process a little bit quicker, where you don't have to write panel reports or take interview notes. So they've still got that human interaction, but we've still found a creative way to integrate AI as well.
Absolutely. It comes back to using AI and automation for the more administrative work and the repetitive work that is really time consuming but doesn't have the quality and doesn't require empathy, which is required throughout the actually interview process. Let's take a step back. How does E-HRM for recruitment can or should look like? So imagine someone who maybe still lives in the times of where we put an advertisement up the newspaper and they're handing their paper CV. So can you draw a picture of the new E-HRM recruitment landscape?
Gone are the days of paper applications and paper advertisements and things like that. We're definitely seeing a shift to more online integration of recruitment processes and application interfaces as well. But I'm going to strip it right back to what I think is one of the most important things with any way that you manage it. Your recruitment process and your sort of intent behind how you recruit people has to be fair and transparent and ethical. Like that is baseline. That is the most important part. So a lot of the time recruitment isn't very transparent, whether it's from not putting the salary up or not listing how many hours or being really vague about the conditions, but also in the context of recruitment itself, how the information is used, what happens to their data, What happens, as they go through the process? Are they going to be notified whether they're successful or unsuccessful? Things like that. Some assurances around how they're treated as a person and also how the information is treated, and what your intent is as a recruiter or an organization that's hiring people. But some other really creative ways that I've seen sort of E-HRM systems that have effectively integrated AI work really well, and I've only come across it recently. Humans inherently are built, so to speak, with unconscious biases, whether we know it or not. If you've got a foreign name, then the evidence, unfortunately, is suggesting that you may be screened out on that basis, which is really disturbing. That person could have been your best candidate, but because AI has screened them out on that basis, there's a possibility you just lost your best person. So what I've seen some systems do recently, which is really cool, the system has redacted a talent pool, taking away the name, taking away the age, not allowing the panel to see race or gender, where they can just see applicant 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you've got a talent pool of 4, and the most you can see is their qualification, professional experience, their references, all things like that. And I guess the panel, an avenue to potentially screen someone out that could be on the basis of some form of discrimination, whether we realize it or not. I'm sure 90% of recruiters out there have good intentions. Us as humans, we've got natural, we're built with inherent biases sometimes. And if a system doesn't sort of allow us to cater to that, then I think that's really cool. And I think that's it means that it's a clean slate. It's fair opportunity for everyone, and you're purely being assessed on your qualifications and your experience alone.
That's a fantastic example where e-recruitment actually helps with blind recruitment as well. I know depending on the organization, sometimes they have to do it manually, but it's so much easier and quicker and safer if you have automation set up for that. You already mentioned bias might be an issue, but can you think of any other challenges in implementing inclusive E-HRM practice in recruitment?
So I've certainly become aware through some of the research that I've been doing, because I'm really treading carefully with how I procure sort of recruitment systems or programs that integrate AI, because there is a fair bit of talk going on at the moment that the way that some AI algorithms are programmed, or the way that their data history is trained. So if you get to the shortlisting process, they're actually screening people out on the basis of age, race, sex, gender, which is not how you want that to go. You're just opening yourself up to an avenue of a discrimination claim, but also it's just black and white unethical. And I'm not a tech genius. I'm certainly not quite sure how to get around this issue. From those that work within the digital IT space that I've spoken to, think that's a matter of time for AI to become smarter and adapt to this challenge better. But certainly in terms of AI shortlisting, if that is sort of the trend that's happening, that AI algorithms and sort of the design of them, or at least the history of it, is that it's screening out on the basis of discriminatory factors. That's certainly a real concern. And I read an article the other day, whether it's true or not, but it's certainly been backed up by other research, that the AI often looks at the history of people that are employed. And if the AI is influenced by the people that you're bringing on board, say it's the typical white stale male that keeps coming through every single time, then it's going to remember that. What the research is suggesting is that AI is going to go, well, they want the white stale male, so we'll continue giving them the white stale male, which is really not helpful if you want an inclusive and diverse workplace.
And there are multiple famous examples for that where it has happened in that way. So it's not just a myth or a hoax or a fairy tale. This is our real challenges that we have to face. And it also highlights how important it is to, when you work in HR, you don't work in isolation. You have to work with your colleagues in the tech or in the finance portfolio, if you can even afford that technology. So this showcase, again, how important it is to include the human, even from a business side as well. How do you measure the effectiveness of these inclusive recruitment practices? So it's all good to have the right intention, but how can we actually evaluate we got there?
I think stripping it back to sort of defining what an organisation considers success to look like. And if success to an organisation that's aiming to be diverse and inclusive, then I think you start with establishing some equal employment opportunity data, or EEO data, as it's more simply known as. So if you don't already have avenues to collect EEO data, to sort of track how you're going in the recruitment space in terms of what initiatives have you put in place to make your workplace more diverse and inclusive, and are they actually working in the first place, or are you still getting the same result? But I think in order to establish some form of AEO data collection, you have to be really clear and transparent as to why you're collecting that data in the first place and how that data is used, and where it's actually stored as well. And even to things like who can access it, because data security is a big deal these days. In terms of measuring the effectiveness of inclusive practices, I think it's really good to sort of track that through your EEO metrics and things like that. It's certainly something that we've started doing the last 12 months because we didn't know. We had done all these programs and initiatives to attract demographics such as First Nations people or people with disabilities. We've got a real big focus at the moment on veterans, for example, because we have a large veteran population in our area. So people from diverse backgrounds, like, well, we're spending all this money with all this good intention, but is it actually hitting the mark at all in the first place? So about 12 months ago, we implemented an EEO data collection system, but that's not a silver bullet in its own right. Like you've got to communicate and be transparent about how that data is used and why we're collecting it at all. And the intent for us that we had to communicate was, well, we're not doing this to spy on you, or we're not doing this as like a tick box exercise. We're doing this because we genuinely want to be an inclusive and diverse workplace. And this is the reason why that we're collecting this data, to make sure they're on track and if we're succeeding or if we're failing in that aspect as well. I guess other ways you could measure the effectiveness of inclusive practices as well. Something that we've also recently started doing is candidate experience surveys. And if you're going to go down that route, definitely recommend considering a quantitative data method, because you can actually track it over time, whether you've performed well at a particular period or things have slumped a little bit. So we ask questions ranging from, was the outcome of your application communicated to you in a timely manner? Did you feel as though the interaction with the panel was friendly and engaging? Did you feel like a person through the process? Did you feel respected and that your time was valued? All things that connect to we're evaluating them as someone that we potentially want them to work for us, but are we succeeding in putting ourselves out there as a good employer as well? It dials back to that concept of employer branding and how we communicate to the talent. The reality is that we're in a war for talent at the moment. That's the black and white of the situation. Everyone's fighting for the best of the best. And if we're not putting ourselves out there as a great employer, then we're not succeeding. Candidate experience surveys really help us understand, are we actually hitting the mark in terms of valuing the time that people put into applying for jobs and actually ensuring they are treated as a person rather than a number?
Do you do anything special to actually get the people to fill it in? Because I know there's quite often fatigue, and sometimes you even get just the responses of people who had a bad experience rather than a more diverse picture of exposure throughout the recruitment process. Do you have anything in place to manage these tensions?
Survey fatigue is definitely a real thing. But in saying that, I almost need to boast a little bit in terms of the quality of the data that we've got, because we've actually got a 50-50 split currently. The first question that we ask is, were you successful in attaining the job? And that gives us a really good insight as to, was someone just disgruntled because they didn't get a job and they're potentially not giving us a real insight into their experience? Or did someone get the job and they're painting a picture of what was a good experience, but maybe didn't have a great time, but they're just giving us the answers because they think that's what we want to hear, and they're saving face because they just got this great new job. But the really exciting thing is that we've actually got a 50-50 split of people that didn't get the job and did get the job, and we still appear to be performing well despite the fact that we've got that split right down the middle. But at the moment, generally speaking, when people apply for our jobs, they seem to be having a good experience.
You mentioned privacy and confidentiality before, but how do you ensure that the data collected during the wider recruitment is actually used ethically? And in addition to that, how do we prepare our managers to use e-recruitment effectively but ethically? Because most of the time, your day-to-day manager is included in the recruitment process, not just HR. So how do we get our managers on board to use it ethically and not losing the effectiveness of it as well?
In terms of how to ensure data that is collected in recruitment is used ethically, you can have all the great intentions in the world, but perception is reality at the end of the day. So you have to be super clear about what your intent is. It's all good for me to sit here and say, look, here's my intent, but you actually get to demonstrate that and communicate it as well. It comes back to transparency, being really clear about how and why, how you're going to use the data and why you're collecting it in the first place, in our case, but hopefully in other organizations. Our genuine intent is that we are trying to create a more diverse and inclusive and psychologically safe workplace as well for people of all backgrounds, regardless of what background you come from, race, sex, gender, nationality. We're trying to be an inclusive workplace because everyone brings value. That's effectively stripping it right back. But, if you don't have programs that are specifically designed to bring on people from First Nations background, that are specifically targeted for those with varying forms of, disabilities, veterans, unless you demonstrate that through your recruitment programs or even your engagement programs once they've come in through the recruitment door, then your intent is really going to stick. So it's kind of like, is my intent, but prove it kind of situation. And another good way to do that is to relate it back to the organization's values as well. So what does the organization actually stand for? Because your organization's values should be front and center. That should be pivotal in what your organization stands for and what it's there to actually achieve. One of our values centers around respect and inclusivity. And we're actually trying to do something actionable from that to address that. So our people, obviously we want them to come to work and do a great job, but in order to do that, they need to be in a safe working environment where they feel as though they're a person and not just a number. Another challenge that I see in terms of recruitment or data that's collected during that process used ethically, I think one of the best advice I can give is only collect the data you actually need. There's so many recruitment platforms out there that you feel like you're playing 20 questions sometimes, where it's just like, well, what are the actual actionables from this data? And is this just, an organization perhaps being a bit nosy maybe? You have to communicate why you need that data. And if you really strip it back to the intent and what data you actually need, then I think you'll find you can wipe about half the questions off that screening board, which, hopefully allows you to use that data to make informed decisions. Another one is be really clear about how the data is stored. And a common theme that I keep seeing come up is organizations that I think are doing really well. They're very clear about that they don't repurpose the data that's collected for marketing purposes. That's something that's really topical, with various data breaches that are happening left, right and center in Australia at the moment. I think you have to be really clear about how the data is stored and that it won't be, well, hopefully at least, won't be repurposed for marketing. And another one is restrict access to that data for those only who need it. This is people's lives, and I think it's really important to remember that. When you go down the recruitment process, you're actually opening a door to that person's very personal life, and you have to treat that data sensitively. And if there's people that have access to that just don't need it or could use that information maliciously, then you've got a problem. So it should only be locked down to those that have been vetted and have a genuine reason to have access to it.
You mentioned earlier on you might have a few strategies how to use e-recruitment really inclusively. So if I would put you on a spot and ask you what is one of the biggest main strategies or ideas that you would tell your everyday line managers who have to do e-recruitment inclusively, what would it be?
One of the first lines that when I'm training a line manager or partnering with them, and they might not be familiar with the recruitment process or E-HRM generally, literally the first line that I generally stick with is when you open that door, you are opening the door to people's personal lives and you're going to have access to information that is extremely sensitive. Thinking about some of the screening questions that I've seen out there, it's just like, do you have legal rights to work in Australia? Do you have any medical health conditions, things like that? If so, what are they? Do you have a criminal background, or do you have any criminal convictions, charges, all that kind of thing? So really sensitive information that you would hope wouldn't go any further than the recruitment team or perhaps that line manager. But once that door is open, it's open forever effectively, and that information has to be treated really sensitively. I have seen some case studies out there across the country where information has been leaked or misused about an applicant, about a past life. They could have had a criminal conviction for, perhaps a DUI 20 years ago. They've completely turned their life around. They're a completely different person. But because that information got out to their colleagues, maybe 5 years after the fact when they were hired, that person is then a target for bullying, harassment. And that's the very real reality and detrimental impact if data isn't used appropriately and kept securely as well.
Taking a broader look, how do you evaluate or see the current talent market when it comes around to recruitment in Australia?
We're in a context at the moment where there's a war for talent. And yet I've never seen a talent market that seems so disenfranchised with applying for jobs, where they feel as though, everywhere they go, it's a people churning machine. They're lucky if they ever get an email saying that they're unsuccessful, and a poorly written one if that isn't particularly respectful. So people do feel disenfranchised with having to apply for jobs. There's so many videos on social media now of people being interviewed by an AI bot, and the person they're being interviewed by barely looks like a human, or doesn't interact like a normal human would, which is really sad and upsetting. Often it's a habit for recruiters, those of us out there, we're so focused on finding that right person for the right fit, for the right job at the right time. But we forget that the candidates out there are also sussing us out, where I think it's particularly important to remember that we're in an employee market. I mean, gone are the days of the 80s and 90s where it was an employer market. Employers control the conditions around what the employment relationship looked like. We can pay this much, we can offer this much. If you don't like it, take it or leave it. These days, the employees rule the market and define what that relationship looks like, which I actually think is for the better, because it puts the pressure on organisations to compete for the best of the best. As an organisation, do we offer flexible work arrangements? Do we offer, maybe leaseback vehicles? Are there market premiums involved? Are there social groups, things like that? Discounts on health and wellbeing benefits, like, access to discounted gyms. We often get lost in the mission of finding the right person, rather than maybe looking at that mission of, well, how can we make ourselves the best as well, so we can get a really good pairing with the best candidate, with the best organisation. And often what you'll see is that that person might stick around a little longer if they feel as though they're treated as a person. So if your E-HRM system doesn't come from a place of being dehumanising or not inclusive, it's really important to remember that candidates will often make a connection or a judgment with their experience in the recruitment process, with how that organisation treats its people. So I would know if I was in a situation where I was being interviewed by an AI bot, even if I was to get a job offer at the end of that process, there's a high likelihood I won't be accepting that offer.
I always will ask a curiosity question for mapping unexplored territories in HR. And here is your special question, Bryce. How would recruitment change if we stop asking, how do we make people fit our culture, and start asking, how do we evolve our culture to honor the full spectrum of human experience? Any initial thoughts?
I mean, it feels like a no-brainer, but I don't feel it is. Yeah, I don't know how many advertisements or position descriptions that seem very set in, well, this is our culture. If you don't fit it, see you later. It's like, well, have you considered that there's other avenues out there, or there's other, beliefs and practices that might make your workplace just that little bit more inclusive, and actually might make it a really great place to work. I mean, some of the places that I've worked where you've come into a culture that's a certain way, and then you bring in new people with different backgrounds, whether it be cultural backgrounds or different ways of looking at things, different beliefs, and you see that culture evolve, and it becomes this beautiful thing where everyone feels as though they've got a voice and everyone's a human, and can engage at that level. I think it's not so much about how do we make them fit into our culture, but maybe what does culture look like for an inclusive team, and what can that new person bring to sort of make it even better than what it is now, perhaps.
I'm a big believer in culture ed, and I would like to rather work in an organization that values culture ed instead of culture fit. But again, this is something everybody else needs to reflect for themselves to make this choice where they want to be working. And that brings us to the end of today's journey through the digital recruitment landscape. From the promise of inclusive design to the pitfalls of bias and automation, we've seen how E-HRM can either open doors or reinforce barriers, depending on how thoughtfully it's built and used. A huge thank you to Bryce O'Hara for sharing his insights, experiences, and practical wisdom. It's clear that inclusive recruitment isn't just a checkbox, it's a commitment to fairness, transparency, and human dignity, even in the most data-driven environments. If today's episode sparked ideas, challenged assumptions, or gave you a new lens on your own hiring practices, I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe, share, and stay tuned. Connect with me, share your thoughts, and let's keep building capabilities together. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the uncharted territories of HR.